Welcome to the book of Esther, a thrilling story about how a little Jewish orphan girl is going to become queen of all of Persia, and then together with her cousin Mordecai are going to save all the Jews from the wicked Haman who plots their annihilation. Now, curious fact about the book of Esther, you go reading along in this book and you're not going to come across the name God anywhere. God, it appears, is absent from the story. Well, is he really absent? Or is he present in all of the coincidences in this story, of which there are many? Now, in chapter 2, first coincidence, Esther just so happens to win the beauty pageant and therefore become queen of all of Persia. What are the chances of that? And then, same chapter, Mordecai just so happens to overhear an assassination plot against the king, which he overturns. And then, in chapter 6, mother of all coincidences, it just so happens that the king, he can't sleep. So he just so happens to ask his scribe to read from the book of the Chronicles of the Kingdom of Persia. And that scribe just so happens to open up to the story about Mordecai. And the king's thinking, man, I got to reward Mordecai. He saved my life. And it just so happens that at that very moment, Haman is going to walk into the royal bedroom, and the king's going to say, how should I reward the man who I desire to honor? And Haman's like, okay, that's clearly me because I'm the man. You got to do all this awesome stuff. Put me on a horse and ride me all around the city. And the king's like, that's a great idea. Do that for Mordecai, which is extremely humiliating for Haman because Haman hates Mordecai because Mordecai refused to bow down to him. Well, next chapter, chapter 7, this is when Esther reveals to the king Mordecai's plot to kill all the Jews, including Esther. He didn't know that. Well, after Esther reveals this, the king, he stomps out of the room in a rage. And then Haman's like, oh, please, Esther, don't kill me, have mercy. He's like grabbing onto her legs or something, kissing her feet, who knows. And then the king walks back in the room. It just so happens at that very moment, and he thinks that Haman's attacking the queen. So what does he do? He has Haman killed. Well, that's a lot of coincidences. Where's God? He is active and present in all of the coincidences in this story. Well, in Proverbs 16:33, it says that the lot, or the die, or the Purim, is cast into the lap, but its every decision comes from Yahweh. In chapter 3, Haman, he's going to take the die and he's going to roll them. And he says that whatever the die say, that's the day that I'm going to kill all of the Jews. The purpose then of the book of Esther is to show that God was in control of those die. Esther is a narrative portrayal, a tangible narrative portrayal of God's sovereign providence over all things. And now the exiles to whom the book of Esther was written, they needed to hear this message. They needed to hear that God was in control of all things, especially and despite the fact that Israel's sin landed them in exile and Jerusalem was destroyed. And even after they came back from exile, it was a pitiful return, and they were still subjugated to the mighty nations around them. They needed to know that God would providentially save, protect, and defeat their enemies and one day exalt their king and lift up that tiny nation to rule over all the kingdoms of the world. And the book of Esther makes that point through these coincidences. So that's a pretty cool purpose of the book. I would like to move now to transition to the book's structure. How is this baby organized? and it is cool. Man, this is fun. I love discussions like this. This is kind of exciting. Esther is it's a chiasm. Now, you remember now what chiasms are, where the outside pieces match, and then the next section match, and then there's this glorious centerpiece over here. Well, let me show you just kind of how this works. Let's take a look at each of these matching pairs and make the case that this thing is a finely tuned, beautifully crafted, perfect story. So first, here in chapters 1 and 2, and then 9 and 10, there's going to be 2 feasts. The king, he is going to say, all right, let's party for 180 days. Yeah, party. And then he's like, well, that's not enough. Let's party for another 7 days. Why not? Well, at the end of the book, Esther and Mordecai, they are going to write a letter to all the Jews saying, all right, let's hold the feast of Purim on 2 days. Let's do it on the 14th and the 15th. 2 feasts. They match. And then also, after these feasts and Queen Vashti, King Ahasuerus' first queen, she refuses to come when he calls. So the king is going to write a decree. And this silly little decree says that husbands are to be the masters of their households. It's ridiculous. But the point is, a decree is written, just like a decree here is written to all the Jews to celebrate the feast of Purim. It goes even more than that. After Esther she wins the beauty pageant, and she becomes queen, the king is going to throw another feast because he loves to drink. He's drinking in like every scene. And he says, all right, I'm going to give a gift, a little present to everybody. Woohoo! Everyone gets a present. Yay! Well, the same word, gift, is going to show up here in the last chapter. I mean, that's one of the key parts about the Feast of Purim. It's a day where everybody gives gifts to one another. I mean, what are the chances of that? Obviously, this is planned. Let's move in one section. So here we have Mordecai is going to save the king. Well, in this section down here, Mordecai and Esther together are going to save the Jews. Because there's an empire-wide hatred of them, it appears, and they want to be killed. Well, they're going to save them. Now, it turns out here, there's this little detail in chapter 2. The 2 people who wanted to assassinate the king, they are going to be hung on the gallows. There's a lot of kind of creepy gallows in this story. I hope you're okay with that. So these 2 guys, they get hung on the gallows. There's their heads. Wah, wah. Well, after Esther and Mordecai save all the Jews, it says that the 10 sons of Haman, they are going to be hung on the gallows too. So here we have these 2 sections matching with the death of Haman's sons on the gallows. Let's move in one more section. So here in chapter 3, Haman is going to write a decree. Again, this word's going to show up saying, kill all the Jews on this day. Well, here in chapter 8, Mordecai writes a counter decree, basically saying, you can fight back. Go get them. And in both cases, they're going to invite couriers in, scribes are going to come in. Haman and then Mordecai, they're both going to be given the king's signet ring. And it's going to be a diamond ring because why not? That's all I know how to draw. They get the king's signet ring to make this decree official. And it says that it goes out to all the provinces. Really, the same language is repeated verbatim in both of these stories, chapter 3 and chapter 8. And then move in nearer to the center, and Esther is going to invite the king and Haman to a feast. After this feast, Haman is going to plan just how he wants to kill Mordecai. He's going to make a gallows 50 cubits high, and he's going to kill him publicly before the nation. Well, there's another feast which Esther's going to invite the king and Haman to. And at this feast, of course, she's going to accuse Haman of his wicked treachery. And then Haman is going to be killed on the same gallows that he made for Mordecai. And then, of course, we've already looked at the beautiful centerpiece, the turning point of the story right there at the center. Now, isn't this amazing? Like, doesn't this kind of blow you away? All of these parallels, this design and intentionality. And I think we do have to ask, though, once we've kind of marveled at it, what is the purpose? Why is this story designed this way? Not every story is a chiasm, I promise you. Some of them aren't. But why is this one designed as a chiasm? Well, I think one reason is that it calls attention to how God exerts his providence to enact a reversal. And this word actually shows up in chapter 9. Let's take a look at the text. So here we are, Esther 9:1. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, this is when everything is going to go down. Well, look what it says. When the king's command and edict were to be carried out on that very day, when the enemies of the Jews, they hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. What happened instead? The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. Now it seems, if you read this story, but if you look elsewhere in Scripture, this idea of one reaping what they sow and poetic justice, just retribution is close to God's heart. It seems to be the way in which he exerts his providence to judge the wicked. Now let me show you an example of this from good old Bible Gateway. Take a look at some of these imprecations, these imprecatory psalms. Look how they speak of reversal that takes place, kind of like what happened with Haman. Haman made a gallows for Mordecai, but he was the one who was hung on those gallows. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. He digs a pit, let him fall into it. Let the arrogant be caught in their own schemes, he says. Let the net that they set, let them be ensnared in it. And these examples just go on and on. But there's a second reason, a second purpose for this chiastic structure, which I want to share with you. So I think that it highlights who the true hero of this story is. Now, in this moment here, Mordecai, he's going to show a lot of faith, an impressive faith. And Esther's going to be very, very brave. Let's take a look at this moment in Esther chapter 4. Esther 4:14. Mordecai says, if you keep silent at this time, well, relief and deliverance will rise from another faith. He believes, he has faith that God will save his people in some other way. And then he says this beautiful line, who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And Esther, she's thinking, okay, I will risk my life and appeal to the king. And she says, I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish. I mean, it's beautiful. She's so brave. What a heroine. It's awesome. But this chiastic structure shows to us that the real hero, the turning point, the climax of the story does not hinge on the bravery or the virtue of these two characters, but rather on the sovereign hand of God. Here in chapter 6, God is the hero of the story. God is the one who will save his people. And God, and the security of the people of God ultimately rests in the hands of God. And that is what the book of Esther is saying to their people.